I'm Bennett Yee, part of the security group. It's been my pleasure to know Markus for quite a while now. Actually, I don't really remember when was the first time we met.
So long we don't even remember.
Yeah, back in the dark ages. And I've had the pleasure to serve on his committee, and now he's the director of CAR at the Indiana University at Bloomington. And he's here to visit us and give us this talk on click fraud and badvertisement. This talk is being recorded for video. So please, if there are any questions that might be Google confidential, please hold that until the very end. Markus?
Thank you, Bennett. Is this connected? Can you all hear me? So I'm going to talk about joint work with two of my students, Mona Gandhi and Jakobsson. We started looking into, we didn't think of it as click fraud at all. We thought of it as a peculiarity that potentially could be used for phishing. And then after a while, we realized that we just used the wrong terms, and this was a matter of click fraud, of course. So coming from that direction, we thought of it as fraud in general, of course. We didn't want to distinguish between different kinds of fraud. But so we think, first of all, email will come in some kind of camouflaged form onwards. And I'm doing work with two of my students right now that analyzes different kinds of camouflage. You could, of course, use things like Cyrillic characters and JPEGs and, CSS and what have you, in order to make it difficult for spam filters to do their job. And we've done some tests where we compile a very spammy-looking message and look at the spam assassin rating, and then we have a plugin for spam assassin that then uncompiles it, more or less. This is work in progress, and I just mention it because I believe that spam filters onwards are going to have a hard time catching up. You guys might have good ideas of how to stop that from happening, but let's assume now that the email is going to get delivered, and then as it's arriving and it's being viewed, then it also views the user. So in particular, I have worked with my student Sid Stam, and there's also a parallel work done at Stanford that considers how a user can be spied on by having their browser history interrogated, and the browser history exposed to just using CSS tricks. And then, of course, the email will display in a way that agrees with the user's expectations. It will arrive as an arbitrary phishing email, but after having taken a quick look at the browser history and seen that the user goes to Bank of America, it will instantly then look like a Bank of America phishing email. But then what I argue is that that won't be all. But as it arrives and is being viewed by the user, why not perform a little bit click fraud too? There's no reason not to. You could fold these things into each other. Of course, it adds a complication to the attacker that takedown of one could result in takedown of the other. But so we should at least fear that these two piggyback on each other, and e-fraud in general becomes more of a complex issue. So this is going to be redundant for all of you, but just so that you got my icons right. This is how many point-per-click schemes work. You got a JavaScript component that displays an image with the banner, and then if there's a click, that will result in another web page, in another window being loaded with the contents here. So here you'll see that I actually subliminally advertise my research group, stopphishing.com. If you go there, you'll find our results. So we don't post advertisement there, but we might one day because it seems like a profitable activity. And so AdSense, this is going to be increasingly redundant here. You don't write to the page, of course. You open an iframe, where Google writes, and so that's the difference that makes the other schemes vulnerable to our attack, but AdSense isn't. Now, it's also important to note that ads can occur in iframes just as fine. So after the click occurs, there's an iframe that opens, and there's the advertisement. The advertisement doesn't know whether it's been opened in a window or in an iframe. And now about same origin policies. Of course, JavaScript from one domain can read anything displayed in the same domain. So if it's readable, if it's printed in the domain, then it's readable by that JavaScript in that domain. And that's really the source of the vulnerability I'm going to describe in detail now. So you got the same pay-per-click scheme, and then you got the bad JavaScript. And the bad JavaScript will just plainly go and read what the good JavaScript printed in this domain, and then cause a click. And the way it causes a click is it makes a get of exactly the information that a user would have called if it actually clicked. And so then that, of course, opens the window, and it's counted as a click. Here, of course, users would find this very surprising. They didn't click, and still the advertisement comes up. So this kind of scheme would probably be very quickly, people would complain very quickly, and it would be brought down. So one question then is, how could one hide it from a user? And the obvious answer is, open a very small iframe, 1 pixel iframe, and that's where you display the advertisement. So that's what I mean with this looking glass, that the user really can't see it, but it's there somewhere. And the advertiser, of course, does not know the size of the iframe. And this is just to point out that you can't really screen what the JavaScripts are. It's evident that these two pieces of code are doing the same thing, but of course, it's a little bit hard to tell because the lower one is obfuscated. And that's, of course, the point, that it's easy to obfuscate JavaScript. And so you can't really look for a JavaScript component that does a particular thing. If you're spidering the web, it's not meaningful to look for a particular piece of JavaScript code that is known to be bad, because they will just change all the time. Now, another question is, how would lots of traffic come to the site? And the way this is going to be done is that, in breach of the terms of service, of course, you'll have one site with a huge amount of traffic, like this XXS site. And that XXS site will open a small iframe in which you got stopphishing.com. Now, stopphishing.com is allowed to place advertisements, and it doesn't raise any objections with the advertising portals. However, these would not be allowed. So what they do is they just take all the traffic they get and they send it to this, unbeknownst to the user, of course. The user won't see a small stop phishing window. It's all going to be a teeny tiny iframe. So this just means that you could get a tremendous amount of traffic to the not so evil looking site, which in fact is the evil site, because that's the site that performs click fraud. And then the question is, how would you hide this from the service provider? And one approach would be just use a CAPTCHA. Users that go to these sites, they're used to jumping through hoops, and they will know that before they can view any pictures, they would have to solve a CAPTCHA. That would not be an unreasonable request. And so they would enter the CAPTCHA, and it would be verified. Now, that, of course, is not going to be as easy for a spider. It's going to require, it could be done, but if it's a good CAPTCHA, it's going to be harder. And so that's one way to keep the spiders out. Now, that's not the ultimate way. The ultimate way is to really look at something that really only humans would do. That could be the browsing pattern or something like that, making it very hard to replicate. And if that happens, then you give access to this click fraud page. So once the person coming to this site has been cleared as a human, then you open this size iframe, and then click fraud is started. Another way to hide this from the service providers would be to instead say, anybody who comes to this page here would be assigned a user ID or something like that. And then, if this ID has not been visited, then you would serve the page that corresponds to click fraud. Because a user who arrives there would be served a unique identifier. But then when the advertising company would, when there's spidering is performed, the reverse spidering is performed, that's of course the second time this ID will be used. Because they will check what the referrer is, and they will go to the same URL, and then it has been visited already. And then legitimate content would be served. So this is to say that this page that drives the traffic could behave differently based on what it sees. And so could this internal page, the page that performs the click fraud. It could say, where was it referred from? What's the referrer status? Also, is this an identifier that has already been used or not? And so on. So it could try to figure out, was traffic coming from this other site? Or did it come from a third party? Third parties are considered suspect to the click fraudster, because that means potential verification. Whereas anybody coming through the XXX portal would be more likely to be a user. Now notice here, you guys would not, unless you know something I don't, you would not know where the user really came from. You would see when the click is performed that it came from Stop Phishing. But you would know the second level of indirection who referred them to that page. And so that's, of course, exactly the point here. Now, this could be made arbitrarily complex so that you have a sequence of sites that passes identifying information. And it's only if you follow through all of them that you are then served the click frauding page. And that is, of course, that will cut some of the revenue, but it will make it increasingly unlikely for reverse spidering to actually succeed at finding it out, because they won't pass through the same hoops, and particularly if there's some subscription along the lines there. And then, of course, it's obvious that this could be integrated in spam. If you got somebody who reads email in a web browser, so any kind of webmail, and it's JavaScript enabled, the same things could happen there. And now I'll tell about some related work, and later I'll explain why this relates at all. This is a phishing study that I performed with a colleague and two of my students last year. And it's to appear in the CACM, and there's a preprint available online. What we did is we took information from a famous social networking site, whose name I promise not to mention here, because of legal concerns from my legal department says I cannot say what site it is. But so anyway, we scraped that for lots of social content. Who knows whom? Which is easy. And then we performed two experiments, one which we call the social context experiment, and one which we call the control experiment. In the social context experiment, a user would get an email that appears to come from a friend of theirs. Now, we would know that it's a friend because they have actually posted on each other's bulletin boards on this social networking site information that makes it obvious that they know each other. So those are the kind of relationship that we took. And from Indiana University alone, we got 43,000 such relationships. Now, we only used around 500, which was sufficient, we thought, for to get statistical significance. It turned out that it was much more than significant. We thought we would get a rather small yield, but we got a tremendous yield. What we did was that we sent an email that appeared from a friend, and we said, this is cool, check it out, and then a link. And we did the same with the control group. The control group, it came from a stranger in the same domain. And so then in these two groups, we counted what people did. If they received the email and clicked, they were taken to a site with login that was reminiscent of the Indiana University logins, but with some very obvious differences. There are some exclamation marks here before the instruction that you must enter your username and password. And the name of the window is phishing attacks using social networks. And this is not hosted at IU. Actually, it was, but we hosted it somewhere else apparently, but then just did a redirect and URL gripping. So all of this actually ran on an IU server. And as they entered their username and password, we never touched it, but it was sent to be verified by this Indiana University network server, which told us yes or no. So we knew whether they authenticated correctly or not. And then we counted, and we saved it. And now we got the response dynamics as a function of time here. And if you know about the takedown claims of companies like Sayora, they're very proud that they take down sites within 4 to 5 hours, whereas it used to be 5 or 6 days. We could see here that for 4 or 5 hours, each bar corresponds to 1 hour. It's not that great because the majority of the victims have already been taken by that time. And you could see here, the slumps here are middle of the night, and then the next day, which is a Saturday, there's a little peak, and then after a few days, we stopped because it seemed pointless. And this shows the number of times that people refreshed, that's the blue line, and which they did repeat authentication, that's the red line. And so there were some people who did repeat authentications quite a number of times. I think it's 10 counts here. And then there were some people who refreshed a tremendous number of times, towards 100. We think that's probably a guy who received an email from a woman that he rather liked, and he wanted to see what really this was. When people logged in, they were given information saying that the site is temporarily unavailable, please try again later. And this is, of course, what made people come back. And we did that not to make a fool out of people to see how many times they would do it, but we didn't want them to complain to their friends and say, what the heck was this? But we wanted them to hold on a little bit longer in order to quell complaints and really get the stats here. Because remember, this was run in an environment where the subjects of the study potentially knew each other. We never selected two people. Like if we sent an email apparently from Alice to Bob, we didn't also send from Bob to Alice. So we weren't intermingling it that much, but they could be roommates anyway. Yes?
Did they know that they were subjects of a study?
Question is, did they know that they were subjects of a study? No, because they would have reacted very differently. After we were done with the experiment, we debriefed them and we set up a blog which they could vent at. And some of the very common complaints were, why did you not tell me before that I was going to be taking part in this study? And our response was, then it would not have been a study. You would not probably have clicked if we told them, now we're going to make you click and trick you and see what happens, and then what happens. So we didn't. But we did get approval from the IRB to do this. And we did, in the debriefing phase, explain exactly what happened and the fact that their passwords were never divulged to anybody. So we got some interesting effects. These are the gender effects. If a guy got it from a guy, he did not really care that much. But if a guy got it from a woman, that was much more interesting. And women were very interested in whether they got it from a woman or a man. It's clearly more social behavior that they want to see what their friends are saying. And these are not the clicking rates. These are the rates for correctly authenticating. The rates to click on the link in the email and to go to the site were between 5 to 10% unit higher. So here are some more demographics. On this social networking site, one could get the political opinion of many of the users. And so we just correlated to the political opinion. And I found something interesting here. People on the extreme left and the extreme right are more likely to fall victim to this, which to me means they're crazier, which was a kind of a nice thing to confirm. Also, we did find that as people got a little bit older, measured by what year in the program they were somewhat less likely to fall for this. And also we checked based on their major. We could see that computer science students never fell for it when it came from when it was a control study experiment. So if they get it from a stranger, they're not clicking, which is comforting. They did fall for it if they appeared to get it from a friend, though. Now, people in the School of Education did not distinguish between friends and unknown people. They clicked no matter what, which makes me a little bit scared of our future teachers. Now, I want to mention, why is this related? And this is related in the following sense. This is a project that I'm doing in one of the classes I'm teaching this semester. I split the students into 2 groups. This is a rather small class, 15 students. One of them are the phishers, and the other groups are the click fraudsters. Now, the click fraudsters, they are experimenting with ways of using social content to increase the click-through rates. So this is an example of what they will do. They will send an email that appears to come from the sysadmin, and they will explain something about the potential virus outbreak and hope that people will click on this link. Now, the link, I don't know if you could read it, the URL is www.semantic-fullscan.com. To most people, and this is part of other studies we performed, this is perfectly legitimate. This is part of semantic, quite obviously, because it says semantic in there. You might think that it's hard to register these things, but it isn't. It isn't. For example, I own Chase alerts. If you're with Chase Bank, then you could sign up for alerts every time you perform a transaction of some kind. Chase alerts was not taken, and I could take it. I also own Organ Chase, which is a funny domain name, but if you append JPM as a subdomain, it makes perfect sense, and it looks like JP Morgan Chase. So there are lots of tricks that you could do, and people, I believe, will do, and which will cause people to find this perfectly plausible and actually click. And then, of course, that feeds back into the previous things. Then they will go to a page that either gives them some legitimate information. In this case, it will say, we've scanned your computer and you're fine, don't worry, no need to contact us. But then it will cause a click. Or you could have other emails, and this is part of the project really, to judge what kind of emails will get the highest click-through rates. So another one is, if any one of you is using Netflix, there's this Netflix versus Chavez case, where previous Netflix users weren't given enough, they weren't given the service they were promised, and so now this is just to give a service upgrade of some kind. Now you could claim something slightly remarkable in one of these emails that you send to anybody, and there's a decent chance that they have been or are with Netflix and will click. And there's also a decent chance that they will click even if they weren't, just out of curiosity. There are surprising facts about what people will do. And so that, of course, could link to that. And that's a social aspect of click fraud. Now, coming to defense mechanisms, to this particular attack, to the window within a window attack, what you could do is what I decided to call Nielsen ratings, but it's probably not such an accurate descriptor. What you would have is plugins for some small number of users that you hope will be representative of the user population. And these plugins, they will act like normal. They will display all information as normal, but they will also open a virtual machine that will perform exactly the same tasks. Display the advertisement and so on. And if ever anything is clicked from inside the virtual machine, of course you know that was not the user, but it was the material inside there that clicked itself. And so you would just trap any calls for that would correspond to a click, and then you would report it. And as I'll show in the next slide, you don't have to do this to a large number of users. A very small number is just fine, and you will probabilistically catch anybody who wants to earn more than a couple of cents for click fraud. And another thing to do would be to have some kind of active spider. Of course, it should not conform to the robots.txt standard. It should go out there and look like an actual human, and it should behave as an actual human. And also have integrated in itself any detection mechanism that checks if ads were clicked on. Now this is quite a heuristic thing, because it could be that this auto-click mechanism would be started only if the user actually clicks on an advertisement. So, and in which case, you'd see that this active spider, if it never will click on anything, then it will never detect the advertisements either. So it really has to behave as closely as we can to human, which is not a simple task, but it's going to be a catch-up with the fraudsters. This is the much more laborious, probably. And the top there, to just have virtual machines planted every once in a while among the users, that's probably the best. Of course, you have to make sure that the people who run that act normally. So the best way is for them not to know it, obviously. But that's a difficult thing. Although there are lots of cases in which this is done, you could have it in a toolbar of some kind. You could have it as an antivirus filter, anything where users are somewhat likely to deploy it and not ask any questions, and where the user agreements allow you to do this. Now, in another study I run with another student, we were doing a man-in-the-middle attack on eBay. And we had all kinds of clearance, and we were allowed to do it. We just tested it on our machines, my student machine and my machine, and we showed it to the people in the IRB because they were curious of exactly how would it work, but never to any outsiders. And then one day the feds contacted the computer science department and asked them to yank the cord to that computer. And we were very surprised. How did they know about it? Turns out that Norton Utilities reported that there was something bad on the machine that was potentially going to do bad things to eBay. And we don't know if it went directly to the feds or via eBay, but we know that it was taken down rather quickly. And so there are precedences for where people put things that weren't known or intended by the user, but which perform some kind of good for society. And this would be one case. Now, looking at the economic analysis of this, there are a couple of curves here. The topmost curve corresponds to a detection probability of 1 in a million. The next one is 1 in 10,000, and then you got 1 in 1,000. And these two graphs here, that is for 25 cents per click and $1 per click. And what it really plots is, here's on the y-axis, it's the profit for the attacker. And on the x-axis is the number of users targeted. And you could see that if he targets too many users, well, his profit goes very small on average. So this is the expected profit. He would be best off here maximizing it around here for the 1 in a million attack, in which case he would earn almost $6,000 per instance of the attack. Now, of course, what he could do is he could have many instances with independent websites that would do this. And if one was taken down, that would not lead the defenders to the others. And so he would collect, for those that he manages to keep up, he would collect 5,000. So that's a little bit too much. On the other hand, if you have 1 in 10,000, you could see that the profit goes down quite remarkably. So this is just arguing that a probabilistic defense mechanism works very well. Now, I know you don't need it because you're not vulnerable to this, but people who are vulnerable to it would probably not want to retool all that they're doing and perhaps pay licensing fees to Google, but instead they would want to say, okay, what can we do on the side in order to prevent this? And also here, using these probabilistic detection mechanisms, you could have a third party just interested in what's going on, and perhaps on their own behalf because they place advertisements or because they sell this information to some other company that do place advertisements, that just run it as some kind of service. And just place it in their plugin. And you'll see that it's not quite worth it for the attacker after a while. So we think the fixes are rather simple. It doesn't require a lot of changes, and you still get a reasonable protection. Now, that more or less ends my presentation. I got a couple of links here. If you go to the first link, you'll generate some advertising revenue. No, just kidding. But that's where my group puts all of the results related to phishing. And if you look under papers and other at the bottom of that page, you'll see the paper describing these techniques that I showed here, there. So obviously it's not a phishing results, and that's why it's not on the main page. But you might be interested in the phishing results too. We're running a lot of user studies and psychological tests, and we find some pretty remarkable things about why people will do things that they do. So recently we ran a test in which people were to rate various stimuli, and at the same time using a think aloud protocol, that they will say what they're thinking. People might say, oh, nice shiny SSL lock, I like the vibes of this site, and ooh, that's a strange thing, and I don't like this URL, and so on. And then we sit afterwards and analyze exactly what made people come to their conclusion. And we find some pretty astonishing reasons why people make decisions about phishing, which I think also might be applicable to click fraud to some extent. And so anyway, that is not yet up there, but if you're interested, I could send you a presentation that I'm going to give this afternoon at ITTC. You could also look, this is more of a corporate plug, I have a small startup on the side, so you could go there and look at our things. The third one is my webpage, and if you go there, I'll actually tell you whom you're banking with. Except if you're banking with one of those banks that don't like this experiment and who have contacted me and said, take us off the list, and then you won't know anything. Or if you haven't been doing online banking for the last 9 days or cleared your history or something like that, then we won't know, of course. But otherwise, we'll tell you. So anyway, I'm completed what I wanted to say, and I want to give you guys an opportunity to grill me.
You said there's different audiences that are more susceptible to phishing.
Second part.
There are different audiences that are more susceptible to phishing. The Department of Education was one of them in your university. And have you looked at any strategies to sort of educate that particular user group, or because it's also education of them as well, right?
The question is, have we looked at strategies to educate users who are in vulnerable groups? We have, but we don't have anything nice to report. In fact, we can very clearly show that education is useless. I mean, it's a sad thing to be said from a person working in a university, but it's absolutely useless. In fact, it could harm. We've run some tests that could show how educational efforts could benefit attackers. For example, if you run a very aggressive anti-malware campaign, if you're a bank, say, and you do that to all your users, then what the phisher would do is they will send an email saying, this is the latest patch, and please download it. And of course, it's a keylogger. So for every educational effort, we could find some kind of drawback. And also, the rules are so complex that average users can't understand it. What people do, they match patterns. And they look for example, things like, we need your password now. They don't like that. And recently, with the Chase rewards attack, I don't know how many knows it, it's you get $20 for filling out a report. And then the price went up to 50, and now it's up at 100. You fill out a survey, and then, of course, in order to get the money, you need to say what your account number is, and you need to authenticate and so on. That's one step of indirection was very successful in the beginning, but now has stopped working. And so if you're really if you believe that you want to do make a killing in phishing, you need a new psychological trick. And a trick that doesn't make it seem like you're asking for something right up front, and then it's going to work. For example, our man-in-the-middle eBay study would just send some, you might be interested in this thing, knowing the history of the person, and then they would actually get to browse around there and see some remarkable prices, because we would do filtering of the prices so that everything looks very rosy. And when they want to pay, well, then they're already 5 minutes away from the phishing email, and they feel perfectly comfortable with this site. And so I think that is a strategy. Education is one of those things that we feel should be left out, pretty much. Yes?
The idea of having a website that has two versions, one of them would automatically click the link and another one wouldn't, it's just a legend site, has been explored before by Anupam. He published a paper in www.99. So I just want to know how your click spam attack would compare to his attack.
Okay, so the point is that configuring content based on who is coming there has been done before. And actually, you mentioned an academic paper. I'm also aware of actual instances of it. BMW Germany were banned from Google for a while because they served two different pages, one to users and one to reverse biders. And so yes, this has been done in many ways. That's not really the novelty of the paper. The novelty is to make use of it in the most evil possible fashion, to really squeeze the most out of that. But that's a good point, that that's something that people have understood before. Yes?
So, if education doesn't work, is there some, for stopping phishing sites, is there something that can be done in the browser to make it more obvious that this fake eBay site is in fact a fake eBay site and not the actual eBay site? Okay.
The question is, can you do something in the browser, like a plugin, for example, that would help people understand it. And yes, that's a good way to do it. There are several initiatives on the way that would in fact do that. One troublesome direction of phishing these days, though, is that it tries to avoid email and web browsers and do it all by phone, for example, or complement it by a phone call. That you get a voicemail when you come home saying, we will soon send you an email, and please follow the instructions in the email. And there's no reason for alert, but just to make you aware of that this is an authentic email. And then the same day you do get an email, and both of these are, of course, from the fraudster. And that one will say, now please, don't follow links, because links have a risk, but instead type in your browser this address. And you know, you could get away with a lot if you actually get the user on your side.
Is there some way, to follow up, is there some way, absent any following of links, is there some way, something that can be done in the browser to detect based on the URL you typed in and the contents of the page? And so maybe some backend database?
Right. So the question is, can you do something based on the content and the URL? And yes, Microsoft has an effort in which they blacklist URLs. Now, that is not going to cause a lot of harm to attackers because their sites are only up for a couple of hours anyway. So one common countermeasure is to just say if it's an IP address instead of a nice-looking URL, then that will require particular scrutiny. It doesn't really matter because users, it turns out, don't like IP addresses. They're very, very suspicious of IP addresses. That's one of the things that people are able to determine, that this is an IP address, it's not a normal URL. Whereas different kinds of normal-looking URLs, they're indistinguishable to users. So probably these kind of filters would do a decent job of countering some of the attacks, but not all. And also, heuristic content-based, it doesn't quite work because you could do tweaking of various kinds.
What about, like, for instance, who is the access the whois information for the domain and compare it to the domain name?
That's good, but it requires a lot of smarts to realize, okay, sorry, the question is using whois. It requires a lot of smarts, and it doesn't always work. For example, there's one attack that we developed in order to say that context should not matter for attackers. We developed all these techniques to say how to get the context of whom you're banking with. And then we took a step back and said, well, let's find a way to making context not matter. And so we developed what we call the switch to Citibank spoof, in which you get an email saying, this is from Citibank, you're not one of our customers, as far as we know, and but we want you to be a customer of ours. We're so proud of our services that we'll match what you're putting in today up to $50. Just follow this link and transfer money from your existing bank account. And so then you get everybody who are not with Citibank thinking that this is legitimate. And that's a much larger group than those who are with Citibank. And that is more difficult to deal with because the logos could be slightly different. It could be a new switch to Citibank logo, and that would still make users feel comfortable, whereas it would be hard to match back to Citibank in an automated fashion.
It seems like it's kind of contradictory what you said about the education, because it sounds like the attacks are getting more complex and they have to make it more complicated to actually succeed. How is that affecting the profitability of these phishing attacks? So the people make more money now, less money?
Okay, the question is, do attacks make good money still, or do they have to be more complex in order to work? They make very good money still. When I'm speaking of more complex attacks, that's really just saying, if you were an attacker, would you rather have a yield of 1% or 6%? And you know, it's all about when you retire. So I think it could be more complex. And also they want to get out of there quickly, you know, expose themselves as little as they can. So they want to do a quick job. But the attacks definitely, there are two kinds. The advanced attack, which are from people who know what they're doing and may even have an education that is very relevant to it. And then there's a set of attacks, which is the larger set, that are just copycat attacks. And we actually have efforts to distinguish copycats from original attacks. Just out of an academic interest, to see, is this the same person doing it again, or is it somebody else who did it but didn't quite do it very well? I've got one example that the Chase rewards attack. turned into a WAMO rewards attack soon afterwards. Now, the Chase attackers, they were very clever with the URLs. The WAMO attackers weren't. In fact, as soon as I saw this attack, I went out and I registered wamorewards.com, and I still have it. So that tells you how aggressive the financial institutions are in demanding things to be transferred. So I didn't do it in order to profit from it, of course, but I did it to just convince myself that these people who did the WAMO attack were doing a sloppy job, and I could have done a better job, and it's not the same people. And so whether that is going to be of commercial interest or not, it's of interest to us to understand the community of phishers. I think we've exhausted all the questions. Thank you.